name is Clark Roman. As Susan said, I am the Literacy Services Director at Literacy Minnesota, and I have been in my role for about 18 months now. And before that, I've had a lot of weird careers in my life, including very briefly as a software developer. And that is relevant because I am all, like most software developers, I am lazy and all about getting technology to do what I can make it do instead of doing manual labor. You'll find that's really common. The big joke is software developers are about the laziest people you can get because we're always looking for shortcuts. We're always looking for ways to not repeat ourselves. So when I was so that's why I think Google Sheets is just an amazing tool for being lazy, for getting the data you need quickly, fast, and easily, and making decisions with that data. So, a brief agenda, real quick. So, we're going to first go through just like a really high level description of what data analysis is and why Google Sheets is a good platform to use. Then we're going to go and dive into the nitty gritty of Google Sheets, some things you can do. So first we're going to talk about filtering, conditional formatting. We'll go through some basic functions, like functions like summing and counting cells in your spreadsheet. Then we'll go through some more complicated functions, like which are called conditional functions. And then we'll leave some room for some next steps. So first of all, what is data analysis? Data analysis is many things. It goes from everything from finding the average of a set of values all the way up to making huge predictive models. It's the process of taking your data, examining, organizing it, interpreting it, and using that to discover insights that you can then use to inform your decision making. It involves a whole lot of techniques and tools, and you can go deep into this with tools like Tableau and SQL, but we're not going to do that now. We don't need to do that now. Right now, we're just going to stick with the good old Google Sheets. And I wrote Google Slides. You could tell I was doing this in Google Slides. Why use Google Sheets? I really like Google Sheets because it's accessible. As long as you have a Google account, you can use it for free. It is collaborative, which means that two people can be working on the same data set at the same time, or you can easily share data sets between people. And it's just, strictly speaking, it's really an effective tool. It is a very powerful tool that I kind of can't believe they give to us for free. However, I do want to say, put a little caveat that if you're an Excel user, the majority of what we cover today will translate to Excel with very little modification. There's one specific formula we're going to cover later that doesn't translate to Excel, but I'll give you a warning about that one. So, setting the stage, there's two kinds of data analysis. One is exploring the data, and one is predictive data analysis. And they're kind of what they sound like. Exploratory data analysis is exploring the data without necessarily using it to make predictions. It's things like I'm going to come up with find the average number of student hours among my class. Predictive data analysis would be taking that data, historical data, and using it to predict what my class student hours will be next month. Right now, we're going to cover pretty much just exploratory. Predictive data analysis gets into some really heavy stuff like linear regressions and a lot of models that, frankly, I'm not even particularly clear about. And I don't think I'm prepared to teach you. Plus, frankly, it's not as necessary for our day-to-day work. So first and foremost, I have a Google Sheet for us. And this Google Sheet will allow you to either work alongside me or practice on your own. So I've taken one of the student demographic data. Susan's helpfully putting in the chat. The student demographic data that is a SID report. I cleaned it up just a little bit, and I ran a program to give all the last name, the first name, and the birth dates all as fake ages and fake names. I didn't want to expose any student information. So we have all of this that is available to play around with as we go through this, so you can either follow along or try on your own. So we'll be bouncing throughout the course of this presentation. We'll be bouncing between my slideshow and actually doing the work in Google Sheets. You should be able to make a copy of that data and play with it to your heart's content. So now let's get into actually the meat of it. Um, let's go into one of the first ways you can use Google Sheets to really find information about your data. And that's filtering. Filtering is just an incredibly powerful tool because it allows you to display only the rows of data that meet a specific criteria, and it hides the rest. So sorry about that. I need to turn off my Teams. Um, it's so I can ask a question on my data and say I only want to see students who have gotten a certain amount of attendance. I can only see those really easily through the filter. And there's two ways to create a filter. We are going to bounce over to Google Sheets and do it in real time. So the first way to create a filter is to go to data in this file menu. So you go to the data menu and you just hit create a filter. Let's see, that didn't do what it's supposed to do. Data, remove filter. Let's try that again. Create a filter. There we go. Okay. So now you see these nice little drop downs that appear. So now you have these as drop down menus. And I can click these. And maybe I only want to look at my female students. So I can select which I want to look at and hit OK. And now, see, I'm only looking at my female students. And that can give me some valuable insights. Maybe it will let me look at, oh, do female students have higher attendance than male students? Or do they, you know, do I have more female students than male students? Are my female students, do they trend younger or older than my male students? Maybe I'm seeing a lot more female students, so I want to do a marketing push to get more male students in, or vice versa. Um, to clear a filter, you can just go back to that filter and just say, uh, and just click the other options, and hit OK. The other way to create filter is under this More button over on the iconograph menu. So if you hit More, you'll see that same icon, that little, you know, mini upside down pyramid with a line. I don't have a name for that shape. So that will turn on or off the filters. Just click it, and remove it or input it. So I want to give an example of how I might use this filter with as an administrator. Funnel. That's a perfect thing. Thank you, Michael. That is a funnel. That is the word for that shape. Um, so a way I might use this, and let me turn on this filter. Okay. A way I might use the filter is we all know, at least as administrators in AB, we all know that the state constantly wants us to check for social security numbers, right? Social security numbers help them track our data, they help track outcomes, the core outcome metrics. And the state is always saying, at least if you were at this year's managers meeting, they're always saying we need to get the number of social security numbers we're up. And say I don't want to go person by person checking if we have a social security number on file. So I might go into my filter and say, I only want to look at students. I only want to see students with no social security number on file. Hit OK. And here I have my list of all students without a social security number. Okay. So that if you look down at the bottom right corner, you can see that the filter has applied and it shows me how many rows are still displayed. I have 110 out of 149 rows displayed. So that's a really nice tool for just looking at a subgroup, a subselection of your data. Another powerful tool, let me jump back over to my slideshow. Another powerful tool that I use often in combination with a filter um, is called conditional formatting. And I'm going to use the word conditional a whole lot throughout this slideshow and throughout this presentation. In programming a conditional formula, a condition is an if statement. The classic example, if it's raining, then I'm going to take an umbrella. So a lot of programming relies on these if statements. It's kind of a decision gate in a lot of programming. So you can make a conditional formatting where you can say, I only want to see cells. I only want to see highlight the cells that meet a specific criteria. So if the cell meets the criteria, then I want to highlight it. So conditional formatting is a fun little tool that helps you visually and quickly look at your data. When I was teaching, I often used it to see when students weren't attending. I would just highlight the students with no attendance, and then I could quickly see, oh, I'm seeing patterns visually in the data. Let's show you what that looks like. So go back to my data, and to go and insert conditional formatting, we go to the Format menu up top and go down to the third to last button, which is Conditional Format. This takes a couple steps to do. So first, you have to choose what range you're highlighting. You can highlight as many or as few cells as you want. In this case, what I want to know is, say, okay, I know right now that I have filtered only students that don't have a social security number. But given the current political climate, I don't necessarily want to go around to just ask every student, do they have a social security number? I think that might cause some students to worry. So for me, I do still want to capture those social security numbers. So I'm going to think to myself, and maybe you'd think this way too. Maybe the students that had education in the US, they might be slightly more likely to have a social security number. Don't know, but I'm going to check that. I'm curious. So I'm going to highlight that range. So that is column X, just highlighting everything in column X. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to go down to this format cells. These are the format rules. This is what's asking if. So format the cells in. And you can do a lot of options. You can say if they're not empty. Right now, everything's highlighted because the cells have values in them. Um, you can do format based on dates. You can format based on numerical values. For instance, if I want to look at only students that highlight only students that have greater than 40 hours. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do text is exactly. So this will ask, is the text in the cell exactly whatever I write in this box? And if it is, it'll highlight it. So I'm going to have it ask if the text is exactly just looking for the words US. And I'm going to hit, and if I want, I can change the color. I can say, if I want it blue, if I want it red, I can change how it formats it. I can make it bold. It'll just apply the formatting to the cells that I indicate that meet the criteria. So I'm going to say done. And I'm going to scroll on down and we're going to see if see, we highlighted the first one. So I'm then going to have that. So maybe I'm going to say, hey, this person had education in the US. I wonder if they're more likely to have a social security number. Maybe it'd be worth asking to see if I can capture that social security number and make the state happy. That's my first question. So that's one really interesting way to use conditional formatting. If you want to clear the formatting, you can either go into the conditional formatting rules and just hit that little trash can, or you can go back to the formatting menu and say clear formatting. Another fun option for conditional formatting is you can do conditional formatting on a color gradient. So we're going to try that with total hours. So I'm going to go again. I'm going to go to format. I'm going to go conditional formatting. I am going to do color scale. Apply to, again, I have to choose the range. So I have to tell Google Sheets what cells I want it to be looking at. And in this case, I'm going to look at total hours. I'm going to highlight that. That's column G through row G. But if I wanted to only look at a subset, I could certainly do that. Going to hit OK. And then I have the color options. So color options, whatever makes you happy. Um, and this is going to say what color the minimum value is, what color the midpoint value is, and what color the maximum value is. So in this case, I'm able to see that darkest green will be the color of the students with the most hours. So I can hit done. And then again, I can unclick that and see, we see the midpoint. Here's someone that's closer to the midpoint because they're middle shade green. Someone a little bit higher, they're slightly darker green. Oh, this person has a lot of hours, 310. That's a much darker green. And so that gives me, that actually might be my darkest green showing. Oh, nope, 455. So that's about my darkest green. We can then say, okay, I found some students with higher, and I can kind of see a distribution of where my students are. It's just a good visual cue for me. You can't really make a lot of genuine, you can't get a lot of genuine like statistical information out of it, but it is a good way to visualize like the range of values you have. It's a good visualization tool. Okay. I am going to go ahead and clear all my formatting off. Um, and let me try that again. Clear my formatting off there. And we'll jump back over to the slideshow. So that was conditional formatting. And so on the slideshow, I tried to make this slideshow something you could go back to and use as a reference. So there's some screen caps within it. Okay, now we get into what are my favorite things, which are functions. Functions are instructions that you give to Google Sheets to automatically calculate or process data. There's things that can do things like add numbers, find average, count the number of values, find the minimum, and find the maximum. And we're going to have examples of why we might use all of this. So let's go to the first one. First of all, how to insert a function. So to insert a function, you highlight a blank cell and you type the function name, whatever that is. And as we'll see in just a minute, Google Sheets is really helpful and suggests things to auto-complete your function. So a lot of times you may not need to have you may not need to remember the full name of the function. If you start typing it, a lot of times it will auto-complete. And every function will take what are called arguments. Arguments are the oftentimes what you want the function to do. A function may take just one argument. It may take a multitude of arguments. It may have a defined number of arguments it takes. And this will make a little more sense when we go into Google Sheets. So let's start with a really good basic function. So say I just want to look at this in column G is my total number of student hours. If I want to look at this and I just want to know how many student hours I have, that's the sum function. So SUM, and the sum function just returns the value of how many numbers, or sorry, what is the total sum, numerical sum of all of the numbers in that column or in the cells I select. So in this case, I'm going to select cells G2 to G150, and that's the entirety of my data set. Okay, Make sure your parentheses are closed. Google will yell at you and your formula will not work if you don't close the parentheses. And then we hit enter. And then I have a nice little formula that tells me I have 7,671 hours in this whole data set. So again, to do a sum figure, another place I might want to do a sum is just to find out how many of those hours were DL hours. So again, we put the equal sign, sum, and again, look at Google Sheets is doing some predictive analytics there. It's saying, I saw that you used sum earlier. I think you might want to use sum again. And it's filling in for me. To accept that what is being filled in, you can just hit tab. And there I see that about 1,300 of those hours were DL hours. So that's a really handy tool just to quickly gauge the hours of something. And cells that you use in your sum figure, in most of these that we're going to do, don't have to be contiguous. And what do I mean by that? So in this one, you see sum is a range of a set of values. So in this case, sum is all the values from cell G2 to cell G150. But if I just want to add up, if there's a cell and I am looking at a set of data, I can do sum, put my parentheses in, and just highlight with a comma between them, select just the cells I want to add. And then I hit enter, and of those three cells, I have 82 hours. That's just an example of the way you don't have to have the cells in the same column, in the same row. Any cells if you separate them by commas can work in a sum calculation. That same will go for average in the counts calculations that we're about to do. So sum is a nice handy formula. Next one is an average. Average is what it sounds like. It presents the mathematical average of a series of cells or the cells you select. So say in this example, I know that I have 7,671 hours. But, having a single student would have 400 hours, it's kind of an aberration, right? We know that most students don't come for 400 whole hours. So what I'm curious about is what is my average student attendance? So again, Google is very smart and gives me some predictive analytics. So average, and you see there's lots of average options. If you ever feel like exploring them, go for it. It's fun. You can look at a weighted average. You can look at the average if. You can do all kinds of statistical fun. So, but I want average in this case. So I'm going to type out average. I'm going to add my parentheses, and then I'm going to add my values. So that is G149 all the way up to G. So G149 up to G2. And another way you can do this if you don't know exactly where your data starts and ends, you can just click on it and drag it up. So I'm dragging it all the way up. And then in my parentheses, and I find out that of these students, the average hours is 50 hours. Pretty good. Pretty good. So average is just takes the series of cells, whatever cells you input, and returns the average of them. Another one. Maybe I want to know what the minimum total hours in the data set is. And, I was able to kind of numeric or visually see that with the conditional formatting, but I'm curious, what is the absolute lowest number of hours a student in this data set has? That is simply the minimum function. So minimum, MIN, and again, Google gives you options. And then, so I'm going to do, again, we're going to do G2 to G150 because I want to look at my entire data set. Hit enter, and we get what I would expect, a quarter hour. Not too shocking. The inverse of the minimum is the maximum function. Um, so again, that's max, stop my parentheses, G2 to G150, hit enter, and we get the whopping 477.75 hours. And that feels pretty good. So I know that that's my minimum and my maximum. Okay. So have you all been able to follow along pretty well so far? Or those of you looking at the data, any questions so far? Okay. The next simple function that I want to go through is the count function. There's a lot of different types of count functions, but the one I use most often is called count A. Count A counts the number of non-blank cells in a set of cells. And why might that be important? That might be important because, one second, I want to remove all my filters just for the sake of example. I might be curious, how many MFIT clients do I have in my set of data? How many of my students are MFIT clients? Because sometimes MFIT clients have specific reporting requirements. Maybe I'm curious, am I getting them referred to me, to my program? Am I seeing more? Am I seeing less? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a count. So a count will show me how many. So we're going to hit equal sign, count, and count A, which again shows me the number of values in this data set. And I am going to highlight the cells I want to look at, okay, which is all my data, Y2 to Y150, hit enter, and I see I have 18 MVIT clients. Okay, that tells me something. I get a little bit more information from that. I don't know what I'm going to do with that information yet, but I at least have an answer to my question. So count A can be really powerful, but I'll show you something that in a few minutes, I'll show you how I really think it's more powerful. It's useful to know how many non-blank cells, and certainly I could have gone item by item and I could have counted these myself, but I really like the fact I was able to make Google Sheets do it for me. So we got 18. Okay. So I think that was my last one more. One more fun one. And this one I'm going to warn you, if you are an Excel user, Excel doesn't have a version of this formula. But I actually use this formula a whole lot to the point that sometimes I will put data into Google Sheets just for this formula, even if I'm otherwise using it in Excel. And that's the count unique function. And that'll count the number of unique values in a set of cells. So a lot of times I might use this if I have a spreadsheet with student names duplicate. If there's a lot of student names where maybe every time a student is enrolled in multiple classes, and every time the student comes, their name's getting recorded. But I just want to know how many total students have, how many unique students have. Maybe I would use count unique in that case. In this case, this is something that's always a fun marketing statistic for us, which is how many unique first languages on my student population. Sometimes our marketing team likes to have fun facts like that. So if they asked me this, of course I could go and I could count them. I could do top box, but instead I am going to use the count unique function. So we're going to find the primary language. Okay, and that's Q. And so I'm going to hit equals count unique, counts the number of unique values in the data set, just like it says. I'm going to choose my selections, hit enter, and okay, so in this data set, we have 15 unique languages. And this is only a subset of our data. That's pretty cool to know how many languages we have. Now, you might have to do a little bit of data cleanup for you because do a little bit of critical thinking. Because see, in here we see I have some unreported. And Google Sheets is smart, but it's not smart enough to know that unreported is not its own language. So, I might have to know that those unreported exist and say, okay, there's actually 14 unique languages in this data set and a handful of students who didn't report what their primary language is. So, okay. Now we get into the slightly more complicated ones. And this is conditional functions. So conditional functions or conditional formulas, a lot of times they have if in the uh, function because they perform an action based on whether a specific condition is true or false. So it looks at each cell as it counts and it says, is this condition true or is it not true? And if it's true, we do something. If it's false, we do nothing. Uh, if then. Conditional functions usually take at least two arguments. Sometimes they take more in special cases. So the first one is SUMIF. SUMIF will add up all the values that meet a certain condition. So the question I'm going to ask here is, what is the sum of total student hours for students that have exceeded 40 hours of programming? So we already asked, what's my total number of student hours? But 40 hours, that's testable. We know 12 hours is enrollees. So sometimes I might want to ask about those, cutoff numbers. How many students who've exceeded maybe 40 hours, which shows a lot of dedication. So I'm curious, do those students comprise the majority of my student hours? And like my gut says, probably yes. Probably most of my student hours come from those students who come very regularly. But until I look at the data, I don't know that for sure. So we'll show you how so if you look at this slideshow, if the first argument is the cells being evaluated. And the second argument says what condition they are being evaluated on. So let's go back to the spreadsheet and let's go back to total hours. Okay, so total hours, right, in column G. So we're going to do this formula, and these are all some of the examples. So we're going to say sum if, and then you see we have a range, which is the range of cells we're looking at, and the criteria for the range. So the range, we're going to do G150 to G1 or G2. Okay, then we're going to insert a comma. And then we're going to say, what is the criteria? What needs to be true for me to add this to my total figure? So in this case, we're looking at greater than 40. It's really important that you put the conditional in parentheses. Google does not like it if you don't. So make sure that you put it in parentheses and you can use greater than, you can use equal, you can even have it look for a specific word or set of words, but you have to make sure it's in parentheses or in quotation marks, sorry. So making sure those are in quotation marks. So basically from a programming function, how this works is Google looks at this and it says, the computer looks at this and it says, okay, we're going into the first cell G2, and we're saying, yes, G2 is greater than 40. We're going to add this to our total figure of the sum figure. Then it goes down to cell G3, and it says, is 5 greater than 40? No. So we're not doing anything. And it continues on down the row of cells that way, asking each time, is this greater than 40 or does this meet the conditional? And so once we scroll down, we can see right here, this is my sum if formula. And we can see, yeah, my gut was right. Most of our student hours come from those students that have been in our programs for more than 40 hours. So we have of the 7,000 and some odd that were in my total hours, 6,564 all come from students that have exceeded 40 hours in my program. So, I can tell those students are coming relatively regularly, and I can make decisions on how I want to serve those students, or maybe what I want to do to reward those students, or if I want to give them some kind of award for coming so regularly, I can make decisions based on that. Another if formula is the average if. Again, so we know that, for instance, I might want to know what's the average of students that are actual enrollees, right? When we did our average earlier, we saw I think it was about 50. But I'm curious, are the students that are only coming for, 0.25 hours or zero point 0.5 hours, are they driving my average down? So a way I could check that is I could set a cutoff. I could say, I'm only wanting to count the average of students that have come over 12 hours. And again, we have the cells that it's looking at, and we have the condition. We have the criteria. So going back to Google Sheets, we are going to go and we are going to count equals average if parentheses. I'm going to select the cells I want to look at. Comma to separate the arguments. And then I'm going to, in quotation marks, I'm going to say greater than 12. And yep, so that's 86 hours. So my average student attendance of enrollees is 86 hours versus about 50 hours for students that uh, that were sorry for students that all my student got. So I can look and I can say, okay, if I'm working on getting my average student attendance hours, maybe I need to focus on those students that are coming regularly. And maybe the students that are only coming 2 or 4 hours, maybe it's not worth me focusing um, my attention on. So another option, another thing that I might be curious about is I might be curious of the students that come less than 12 hours, what's the average? Are they only coming for half an hour, one class? I'm just curious. So I'm going to try that average if again. So I'm going to put equals average if, parentheses, highlight the cells I'm interested in, comma, and then less than. Like many people that grew up going to elementary school and learning, I always think of the alligator eating the bigger number. Um, so that's how I remember greater than or less than. Shout out if you also learned greater than or less than that way. And I did something wrong. Yep, I put that the wrong direction because I was talking about it. So less than 12 hours. Okay, students that are less than 12 hours only only attend on average 3.6 hours. In my program, that means they've probably been tested and maybe attended one class. So that's really useful data for me, right? It means that I probably want to focus my attention on getting my student average up of those students that are attending more often. And that those students under 12 hours are really pushing my average to be artificially low. So my average looks pretty good, especially when you don't count those students that maybe only attended for one class. Another if statement, if program that I use often is count if. Count similar. It counts the number of values that meet a certain condition. And we're going to use this to show the way that the if statements can sometimes be used with words, not just numbers. So, for example, I might want to know how many students I have with different educational levels. So I want to count the number of students that have no schooling, that only went to grades 1 through 5, grades 6 through 8, grades 9 through 12, and then the ones that maybe went to post-secondary school. So I can kind of get a distribution of my students that way. So how we do that is we can actually put words in. And in that case, it is asking, does the word in here match before I count it? So count if equals count if, okay? And then we choose the range, okay? And then parentheses, quotations, no schooling. The case needs to match exactly. Google, again, is smart, but it's not that smart. So the text needs to match exactly for it to know what it's doing. So here's a case where Google's being awfully smart. It's saying, it's suggesting an autofill, but it's not autofilling correctly. So be careful. Sometimes it'll do that. Sometimes it will say, we think we know what you want, but it doesn't actually know what you want. So I'm going to clear that out. So we know that for no schooling, I have 23 students. Just a quick tip, you can copy and paste within a formula. So I don't feel like typing out grades 1 through 5 and making sure my spacing is exactly like the spacing I'm looking for. So I'm going to just go and I'm going to hit equals, um, count if, and I'm going to, again, choose my range, parentheses, and then I'm going to paste inside of my quotation marks, grades 1 through 5. Okay, and we see I have 19 students that went from 1 to 5. And you could do that for all of these options, and you could get a sense of what was most of my school students' formal educational experience. So that's a really good way to use the count if statement. Okay, and then finally, you can go real deep on count ifs. So there are count ifs and sum ifs and average ifs. These ones get even more complicated. So this is an example. Say I want to know the number of my students in my data set that have both more than 40 total hours and also more than 5 distance learning groups, right? Maybe I want to know that for so and so. So this is where you have multiple sets of criterion that all need to be true for it to be counted. So for this, so we're gonna find an empty cell. Y'all are troopers kind of watching me bounce around different screens and on this. So
Just going to give you a time check, Clark. You have 15 minutes left.
okay, we're about to get to questions, so perfect timing. So count ifs, you remember the S because we multiple criteria to be true. So we're going to say, what's the criterion range 1 and the criterion that I work out? So I want to know table A hours. So H150 to H1. And in this case, I want to know people that are more than 40 hours. So greater than 40 in quotation marks, comma. And now my criterion range 2. So I'm going to say criterion range 2. What is the range of figures I want to look at? That is the DL hours. So we're going to select the DL hours. And in this case, I want to know who also have DL over 5. So again, greater than 5. And close my parentheses. And we get a value. What did I do wrong? I did something wrong. Let's see. I think it's this. Yep. They want this one. The reason I got an error there is it wants the two sets to be identical. I need to have the two ranges of cells, H1 through H150 and K1 through K150. they need to be identical because we're checking both conditions to be true. And if I can't check that both conditions are true, Google shoots me an error. That's why that error happened. So we get our answer. We have 26 students that have both greater than 40 hours and greater than 5 hours of DL. And you know what? That doesn't seem so great. So maybe I want to do a push on DL. That tells me something. Okay. One final one we're going to do, and then we'll open it up for any questions. And this one is sum ifs. Sum ifs, for me, it gets a little bit too many conditions, but bear with me. So, sum ifs equals sum ifs. We're looking for multiples. The first thing we want to know is what range do we want to count? What is the fundamental thing we are counting? And let's say in this case, we're going to say it's total hours. Okay. So first is, I want to know the total hours, but I want to know the total hours where criterion range. So this is where I am looking for things to be true. What criteria? So I'm going to say, I want to know the total hours where the DL hours are greater than 5. So I'm going to choose that. That's the range it's looking at. And then again, greater than 5. And let's say we want one more criteria. Let's say we want, and the education level is no schooling. And I'm curious, does that have any results? So we're going to say pull in the second criterion range, and we're going to put in parentheses, no schooling. Okay, close my parentheses. We'll see what happens. Okay, so we had 884 hours from people that have greater than 5 hours of DL platform usage and have no prior formal schooling reported. I don't know what I'm going to do with that data. It's an interesting little fact. But that's a way you can chain conditionals together. So you can have multiple things that need to be true to count things. So maybe I'm curious. I might do this to be curious about students in Hennepin County versus Ramsey County, because for me, those are two different centers. And so maybe I'm curious, okay, I'm going to look at Hennepin County and I'm going to look at DL usage. And I'm going to see if there's a difference in my total hours. Just out of curiosity, something I might do. And once you get into those multiple conditionals, that's where it gets a little vague for me, I'm going to be honest. Okay, that was my last formula to demonstrate. Now we can play around. Does anyone have any questions? I'm trying my best to use teacher patience, but I am not good at teacher patience.
Can we ask a question? Can I go off mute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, back in the very beginning when you were in conditional formatting
Yep.
and you were showing color shading, say you picked some data to color shade and it was all up and down in different places in the column. Can you rearrange the column to put it in order by shade?
You can.
And is
So,
that easy to show how?
yep.
Okay.
Well, I think you can. I've never tried this, but we're gonna try it out. So you're gonna need a filter on for this. So turn the filter on, and then, so we're gonna highlight the row that we're doing conditional formatting in. Okay, one sec. I want to make sure that I don't have my formulas down here because that'll throw off the data. Okay, so highlight the total hours. Go back to format. go to conditional format. Okay, we're going to go over to color scale, and we're going to say minimum value is, again, going to just do light or white. Mid value is medium green, and then we have the darkest value. Hit done. And then we're going to see if this works. So then in the total hours, you can sort by color. So fill color. Okay, so you can't sort totally by fill color. Let's see what happens when we try to sort by the darkest, which visually appears to be this color. I'm just curious. Okay, that does not work. I thought it did. But you could sort, yes, you could sort A to Z, or which will then give you minimum to maximum, like Michael says. So if you sort A through Z, then or Z through A, you can get minimum to maximum, which would then do that thing, would show it in the color gradient. And that's really useful for if I want to sort my students, maybe I want to sort my students alphabetically and also look at something. You could do that too. So once you have a filter set, you can do all these things. You can filter by conditions, you can filter by values, you can filter by colors, you can sort by colors, all those things. Filters are incredibly useful. Any other questions? Feel free to come off mute. Okay, if I'm hearing no questions, I think we can give you 7 whole minutes back to your day. But thank you all for attending. I'm going to be doing another Google Sheets training, and that this one's going to be on pivot tables, which are a way of taking your data, which looks like all of this information and categorizing it into specific discrete categories, and then creating charts and tables out of that information. So feel free to register for that. I believe that is in 2 weeks from today. And we'll go again, deep dive into Google Sheets.
All right, thanks, Clark. I'm going to turn the recording off now. If I can find where the button is now, because they moved it. There it is.